Welcome back, everyone, to another episode on Living Your Greatness. This is your host, Ben Mummy, and the goal of my show is really simple: to learn from those who have mastered their craft. If you're new to my show, please be sure to hit that subscribe button. Today, we have a new guest to the show, and his name is Martin Armstrong. He is the CEO at Armstrong Economics. So without further ado, Martin, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
Martin, thank you for being here. I want to actually start off this conversation with your origin story. I'm aware that you started working at a coin and stamp dealership at the young age of 13. So, how do you think this maybe brought you to the person you are today and also lead to becoming forecaster?
Well, I got that job because my parents were going to take me to Europe for the summer. And something inside me said, I just wanted to earn my own money. I guess maybe independence or something. But what was good about it is that back then it introduced me to the world of finance and that gold and Bretton Woods and the fixed exchange rate and all that. And I knew, from working there, gold was $35. That was the fixed rate. And then I would say two things that really happened. One, in a history class, a professor brought in an old black and white movie, Toast to New York, which was about the Panic of 1869, where Cary Grant was in it, etc. And here is this guy, Jim Fisk, looking at the ticker tape and turns to his girlfriend, Josie, and says, "Hey, gold's $162 an ounce." And I'm like, what? How could it possibly be higher then than it is today? It kind of changed my view of the world. It wasn't linear. Suddenly it's cyclical. That something could be much higher before and then down. I mean, then it was like the Great Depression, and then I began to realize that the economy booms and busts, and the same thing in studying history, that you saw that all empires rose from nothing, became great, and then fell to dust, and they're all buried in the common grave. So I think that really kind of set my path, and that viewing that wasn't true. And then in school, I just didn't really take to it as much, I guess, mainly because in physics class, I went there and the guy says, nothing is random. Then you went to economics class. Oh, everything's random, so we can manipulate it. They said, "When are you guys lying here?" So I think those early views basically changed things. And then my parents taking me to Europe for the summer introduced me to currency, because we had we drove from, Sweden down to Italy and Spain and went all around Europe. And every time you crossed the border, you had to change your currency. And the interesting thing was, then I learned that no matter what country I'm in, I'm then converting that currency in my head back to dollars to judge it. Is it fair or overvalued? So I began to realize that the currency that you are growing up with is also a measure economically in your head, to value. And just like we have languages, etc., and you may think of something and you're thinking it in words. Currency is the same way. So we think in the currency of our country, and everybody does. So you decide whether to invest in another country by looking at that currency in terms of yours. And I think these are basic things that economists don't understand. and have wrongly presented things a lot. And then you take like Keynesian economics. Um, it's completely failing now, mainly because Keynes, when he devised it back in the Great Depression, the U.S. had a balanced budget. So if you raised interest rates or lowered interest rates, that did affect us directly, not government. All right. Now the governments are the biggest borrower in the room. So they've actually lost power. The Fed raises interest rates, and all of a sudden the interest expenditures to keep rolling over the debt keep going up. So now we're spending like $1 trillion on interest alone. So things change over time. And I don't think that's what the academic community really appreciates so much. And in all honesty, they never pay off their debts for anything. So we are still paying interest on World War II. I mean, whatever we spent on World War II, we've spent 3 times that amount just on the interest ever since. I mean, that's why the system itself is unsustainable. I mean, this has been played out many times throughout history, and it does not end well. But, we are saddled with politicians, and they will make decisions always in their own self-interest.
What is your biggest fear that you have right now for the monetary system?
Um, I don't fear it so much. I mean, because I know it's not going to survive. But I would say that the best thing to explain is like this digital currency issue. I mean, as a programmer, I can tell you the code for blockchain, for Bitcoin, came from the NSA. Those of us that are actual programmers, no code, that's where it is. That's where it came from. If you're really trying to create something outside the central banks and freedom, etc., you don't create something that can be traced all the way back. If I give you $100 bill, they don't know where I got it from. But if I give you 100 in Bitcoin, they know who I got it from and everybody down the line. That's not freedom. That's exactly what the government has always wanted. And so I think we call them balloons. They do something and they floated that, and people accepted it. And, oh, this is great. This is against central banks. It's not. And but it comes from the private sector, so they trust it. If it was the government throwing it out first, they wouldn't trust it. So they sell it first this way. And then you start hearing about, the digital, currencies, central banks. This was their plan all along. Why? Because in meetings that I've had with governments all around the world, they all say the same thing. They wouldn't have a problem if everybody paid their taxes. They believe that on average, 35% of the economy is underground. You hire a 16-year-old girl next door to watch the kids while you and your wife goes out to dinner, and you gave her $50. Oh my God, she didn't pay taxes. That's what our whole problem is. This is the way they look at it. It's that 16-year-old girl that's bringing them down. But so I would say I'm more concerned about the short term, but this is not going to survive because it is the ultimate form of tyranny, and they intend to cancel currency. I mean, there in Canada, Trudeau canceled all the high, denomination bills. I mean, you can go online and find out there were $10,000 bills in the 1930s, $1,000 notes. Why is it today that the maximum is 100? It should be the opposite, right? If we got so much inflation, we should have, $20,000 bills, because $10,000 when a Cadillac was $600 was an awful lot of money, But this is what we're looking at. They know this system is collapsing. They're not stupid. They know that. And I mean, that's largely why they are so against Donald Trump and even RFK. People have to understand that I was in Washington when Ronald Reagan was elected. He was a governor, and they were beside themselves. They said, "Oh my God, we're going to have to train him." I said, "What's the problem?" "Oh, you don't understand." I said, "What don't I understand?" They don't like anybody from outside of Washington. So that's why they don't like RFK just as much as they don't like Trump. I mean, they fought like hell to keep him off the ballot. They don't want anybody actually coming in and reforming anything. They all eat out of the same trough. So when it comes to voting for money for like Ukraine, suddenly both sides agree. What's our cut? That's basically what goes on. So I would say that my biggest fear is it's just that we have to go through this pain before people rise up and actually fix what's the problem. There should be term limits. A government by the people and for the people should be a real democracy. We don't live in a democracy. We live in a republic. All right. Do they ask us, gee, shall we go to war with Russia? No, they just do it. Then we're drafted and we don't show up, we go to jail. We're not asked, should we raise your taxes? Do they ask you that question? No. They don't ask us anything of any importance. Just look back at Vietnam. 18 years old, you were old enough to be drafted to go die for war. You were not old enough to even have a drink, no less vote. But that's democracy. That's tyranny. That's why there were so many protests back then about that sort of thing. You can read Plato's Republic, and in there's a debate between Thrasymachus and Socrates. And Thrasymachus says, justice is the same no matter what form of government. It's always the self-interest of those in power. And he was correct. And you're talking about over 4,000 years ago. Nothing's changed. So, when will we wake up and realize, hey, look, if we want a stable world, we got to change some things because they haven't been changed so far.
What are the things that you think we would have to change for the world to change right now?
You have what we call neocons. And honestly, they are, I think they're people that just grew up hating China and Russia because they were communists. And then communism fell, but they didn't change. They're still preaching World War, III. And NATO was created. Fine, you had Khrushchev said, "We will bury you." It was an economic philosophy that our way, capitalism is evil, and we're going to spread communism and Marxism to the world. That was the threat. Okay, well, communism failed. All right, it's very inefficient. I was actually called in by China to help them become capitalist. And it was a very interesting experience because I met he took me to this one facility and they were monitoring everything. But there were actually 249 varieties of tea, which I had no clue there were that many. And the questions I was getting, like this one tea selling for like $1 here, but $5 over there. Why? I said, well, where's it coming from? Well, here. I said, first you have transportation costs. They go, oh, wow. Yeah, okay. I mean, I was teaching them at the very basic level. And I said, then somebody's going to pay more for this one than that one because it tastes better. All right. In communism, if it was $1 here, it had to be $1 everywhere, even if it cost you $10 to get it there. That's why it failed. I mean, this whole nonsense equality. We're equal in rights, not in talent. Somebody may want to be a great magician or a football. Are you going to pay me the same rate that a quarterback's going to get when I can't throw the ball as good as he does? I mean, we're equal in rights, yes, but not in talent. And the price of it, somebody will go up in proportion to what the supply and demand is. Not everybody can be a rocket scientist or a brain surgeon. And if there are fewer of them, then they're going to make more than if they're a surgeon on something else. I mean, this is nature. So my concern is that going into what our computer's been showing is 2032, things will come to a change. But between here and there, it has to get worse in order to make people wake up to say, okay, now we do have to fix it. You don't fix something unless you can see it's broken. And that's where we're at. So my fear is more of they will try with the digital currency thing. And I can tell you what their scheme is that, they do want this one world government and they want the UN to be in charge of it. And they've been using climate change as the excuse that no one single government can possibly, change the climate. It's going to take us all together. So therefore, you need one central power. And I can tell you from my studies of history and dealing with governments, when you create a centralized government, you introduce a tremendous amount of problems. Because one size does not fit all. All right. Right there in Canada, you have the West, which is much more commodity oriented versus the East. The same thing in the U.S. You got, the wheat belt, etc. We don't grow wheat, so much in New York. You have different based economies. And New York is much more financial oriented than like Georgia, for example. So you have to understand that one size does not fit all. And if you even just look at the history of Russia, when Lenin led his communist revolution, he wanted it to be like the United States, insofar as the states would all come together as a confederation, but retain their sovereignty. It was Stalin who said no. And the Russians generally believe that Stalin poisoned Lenin and his wife and then usurped all the power. Lenin had even written a letter and said, do not let Stalin follow me. He did. And then that's what created the Soviet Union. You had to live by his dictation from Moscow. That's not what Lenin envisioned. Completely opposite. So when you create these centralized dictatorial powers, that basically eventually leads to divisions and countries then break up. You can look at what Trudeau's done with the climate change policies. In Washington, we have they're going to like over abortion, we're going to force every state to do this. You can't force people. California is very liberal. You go to the middle, we call it the Bible Belt. It offends them. All right. So what's next? Do you say, well, I disapprove of your religion, so you must be, agree with mine? Um, these are the things that have created battles throughout the centuries, have led to wars, breaks up of civilization. We seem to make the same mistake over and over and over again. And I think that the simplest thing I can say is centralized control, regardless if it's left or right, doesn't matter. When one side thinks it's now my turn to force the other side to do as I command, that's not civilization. Civilization flourishes when we all get together and we all benefit.
Right.
Rome basically showed us that. They conquered all these lands. The Christians misinterpreted it. They said, oh, they're all pagans. Look at all the gods they have. No, they basically believed in freedom of religion. So just because they conquer your country didn't say, okay, fine, you have to give up your God and worship ours. They allowed everybody to keep their own. So it's not that they were, dictating religion. And as long as everybody benefited, and why Rome established 1,000 years of peace, there was no trade restrictions, no taxes on imports and duties and stuff like this. You're in France and you wanted to make something, and there was a market in Syria. So it was a free market. That's why everybody stayed. As long as everybody benefits from this, then you have world peace. Just look at what they did to Russia with the sanctions. Once they put the sanctions on Russia, they divided the world economy. Suddenly you have China realizing, hey, they could do that to us. Other countries start saying, hey, they could do that to us. So now you have the BRICS. You're destroying the world economy. You're destroying the very foundation that would have created peace.
What lessons can we learn so then we do go back to creating peace?
I think that, more or less, I think Rome is probably the greatest example. Everybody had the right to a trial by jury. There was a rule of law that people respected. Once you start playing around with that, even what the Biden administration has done to Trump is absurd. The judge down in Florida just finally dismissed the charges on the documents nonsense. Well, Biden had documents and stuck them in his car in a garage. Hillary Clinton had her private server with, not just top secret, but things that even above top secret level. They weren't charged. When you start fooling around with the law in this manner, so what we call selective prosecution, then it's not justice for all. That's what Thrasymachus warned about. Justice is only the self-interest of those in power.
Right. So knowing this information and knowing that there's a real Ponzi scheme right now of debt, which has been building, for decades, how can someone protect themselves?
Well, I think you have to understand that if you had, stock in General Motors and they go bust, goes into bankruptcy, they sell off the assets, you get something back. If you have government bonds and they default, go bust, you get nothing back. They're unsecured. People have to understand this. Government is the worst thing to lend to. They always default. They never pay off their debts. In fact, There's a book on the old Medici. Um, I forget the author's name. On the bank of the Medicis, they basically had a rule that do not lend to the princes of Europe. And they all followed it, and one later generation decided, all right, fine, politically we'll do it. They defaulted, and that was the end of the Medici Bank. It's just the way it is. They don't pay their debts. Spain was a serial defaulter. It's defaulted 7 times. Why would you buy it the 8th time? I don't know. But governments, I think what we have to realize is that governments must be prohibited from borrowing, period. They should not be allowed to have any kind of a national debt. Because this is the problem. Like I said, we are still paying interest on World War II. They never pay anything off. And one of the major things that they need war for, that you can go on eBay and buy bonds, etc. They all defaulted 1931. I mean, this is what happens. They want war. Look, 30, 40 years ago, everybody wanted peace. Now it's like every world leader is like, yeah, go get Russia. Let's go in. Why? Because they will default. You started having inflation, and Biden came out, oh, it's Putin's inflation. I mean, they will default, and they will use a war as the excuse. And what happens is a new government will then be established, and that never honors the debt of the previous. You can also buy continental currency from the United States from 1776. It's all over the place. The Constitution said they would honor the debts of the previous continental Congress. They never did. So, people held on to this currency thinking it would be redeemed. You can buy it all over eBay. They never redeemed anything. $60 notes from 1776. You realize what that would have been worth today in real money? Probably more than a $10,000 bill. But this is the way governments are. France, Syria, defaulted many times. They're all the same. France is what, on its 5th republic? They didn't honor the last one. This is the excuse. Oh, that's a different government. We're not going to, we disagree with them, so we're not going to pay their debts. So understand that's why they need war. But after this, we should honestly prevent government from borrowing, but also you have to understand socialism is not for the people. It's for the government. Vote for me and I'll give you this. It's bribing the people to get votes. And it's even one of the 10 commandments. Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's goods, right? But they always do. Oh, look at that rich person. He's got more money than me. That's not fair. Go get it. Back, I think it's in the 10 commandments, because even if you look back into ancient history, Sparta never even issued coins because they were one of the first communist organizations. Everybody had to be absolutely equal. Everybody had to go into the military, and there were never any coins. They're the ones that took down Athens in 404 BC. So, I mean, these theories and ideas are not new. What I find remarkable is that every time there's a crisis and somebody comes up with here's the solution. Nobody ever asked a simple question. Has this been done before? Did it work? Nobody asked that question, ever. and they do the same thing over and over and over again.
So how do we break these patterns? Because it seems that there's a lot of patterns from history that we keep repeating.
Yes, and you have to understand that human nature has never changed. You can go back and read some of the accounts. There was a real estate crisis in Athens. A guy borrowed from the temple, speculating in real estate. Real estate went down. He couldn't repay his loans. And suddenly they found out the high priest was giving him money on the side. None of these things have ever, it's always the same thing. There's always and it's human nature that responds the same way. And that's what really makes history in a way repeat, because we never learn from our mistakes. And what I've concluded is basically when you're a young child, your parents will say, don't stick your finger in the flame of that candle. We all do it. Got to stick it in and see how it felt. Oh, wow, that did hurt. Okay, I'm not going to do that again. You then tell your child, don't do that, and he still does it. All right. But individually, we learn from our past mistakes. Collectively, as a society, we do not. All right. So that's why empires rise and fall. They always do the same thing constantly. I mean, I would like to think that maybe after 2032, we sit down and say, let's do this correctly this time. Republics are the most corrupt form of government. And unfortunately, the fake news back in ancient times was Cicero. And so a lot of the founding fathers of America, they read, Caesar was this dictator, etc. Well, so was Cicero. Dictator was basically for 1 year. And when Caesar crossed the Rubicon, he didn't fight his way to Rome. All the cities cheered. They opened their gates. Why? Because there was a debt crisis back then as well. And the Senate fled to Asia. There was no battle. He just crossed the Rubicon. They all fled. Why did they flee? Because the people hated him. They were corrupt as hell. To illustrate the level of corruption, it was Julius Caesar that revised the calendar. All right, he's the one that set up the number of days for the year, etc. Why? Because Rome used basically the calendar on the moon, but they knew that was, incorrect. So they had to insert some days like leap year to adjust it to the sun. Who was in charge of it? The high priest, on a discretionary basis. So they would just simply go to the high priest and say, look, here's a couple $1,000,000 or whatever. Insert a couple months so that we don't have to go to election right now. And that's what he would do. So when Caesar crossed the Rubicon, it was January 10th. It should have been winter, but it was summer. So when he got in, he cleaned up the corruption. That's why he was so cheered. Eventually, that's why they assassinated him, just like they're just tried on Trump. They don't want change. All right. So everybody that he pardoned, and that's why they say his last words, et tu, Brute, you too. He pardoned everybody who was against him. Is that a dictator? He was very magnanimous. And they came back and killed him because it was all about power. And that's why then his nephew, Octavian, they form another triumvirate with Mark Antony, and then they went after him again. So, and then you end up with the imperial period, with Augustus becoming the first emperor. Why? Because the Senate was so corrupt and nobody wanted to give them power again. It was better to be in the hands of one guy than it was in the Senate. So, I mean, we have to look at these things. I mean, every representative we have in a parliament or Congress, they're up for sale. Vote my way. What do you want? I mean, just look at the Panama Papers. The number one country with the most politicians with hidden offshore accounts is Ukraine. It's notoriously the most corrupt country on the face of the earth. I was even asked, would I advise the government years ago? And I said, and they actually said to me, we can pay you in an offshore account so you don't have to pay taxes. I said, no, thanks. I mean, can you imagine a country telling you to do this? I mean, I never, no other country I've ever dealt with has ever suggested such a thing. But this is what you're looking at. We have to understand the real situation. Like I said, when Caesar crossed the Rubicon, it was a debt crisis, but the debt was even more severe back then. Let's say you borrowed 200,000 for a house, and now the house is only worth 50,000. The guy that lent you the money, you can't just say, I'm going to walk away from the mortgage, it's yours. No. You still owe the 200,000. They wouldn't take just the property back. They would take your children and sell them in slavery to make up the difference. So a debt crisis was a little bit more severe back then than today. So we have to understand these things. Unfortunately, the founding fathers of the United States read Cicero and they created a republic instead of a democracy. We see still a little bit of the democratic process in Switzerland, where they have a vote, shall we do this? Shall we? And everybody votes on it. That's the way it should be. Because you're going to get one person who makes a lot of money from war, and he's going to pay off somebody else to go ahead and take us into war. And then you have others. I mean, there's a McNamara, who was basically a neocon that took us into Vietnam. Before he died, he wrote a book, but there's also a video that he did on YouTube, apologizing, admitting we were wrong. They thought Russia was involved, and they were not. He said it was just a civil war. 58,000 Americans died for that mistake, and how many millions of other people? They just don't really. I think they become numb by that aspect. And I can tell you that I went to dinner at Trump's Mar-a-Lago back in March of 2020. And I was surprised because that's when the first time I heard him say that he wanted to pull the troops out of Afghanistan. And but it was the reason. He said he was sick and tired of writing letters to their families to say their son died for God and country. He said, what? And he said, what are we doing there? They've been fighting over borders for 1,000 years. What difference are we going to make? And that's why he wanted out. I mean, I knew Margaret Thatcher. I knew many different heads of state. And I think what it is they become desensitized to the war. Oh, well, we have to do this. Yes, people are going to die. So what? Collateral damage. So they don't take it personally. I think Trump, not being a career politician, wasn't indoctrinated into that philosophy. So he actually was concerned about the families being broken up. And this is why, if you look closely, they're against Trump and RFK. They don't want non-politicians there. And it's an important lesson to understand, because once they all get there, they all back each other up. And it just becomes a philosophy. It's the same thing with vaccines. Every vaccine, there's some people that die. I have one guy that works for me. His entire family can't even take a flu shot. They get sick. We're all not the same. So the head of a Pfizer, whatever, he knows some people are going to die. Well, that's the price of doing this. So they don't take it personally. That's all I could say, is they become dehumanized in that sense. Claiming to help society, but at the same time, they know they're going to kill a bunch of them. Well, so what?
What role do you see gold playing in New BRICS payment system compared to the US dollar-based system?
I don't really see it being a major role in the BRICS system. It is BRICS is taking place because it's geopolitical, not because the dollar is not backed or something like that, because all currency is fiat. What's the real issue? Once they took Russia out of the SWIFT system, then it weaponized the dollar. And then suddenly you do as I tell you or else. That's what BRICS is really about. All right. Fixing it to gold. If you try and fix the exchange rate of gold to it, that's going to fail. That's why Bretton Woods failed. All right. You fixed it at $35. However, you didn't limit the amount of dollars being, created. So eventually that exchange ratio, collapsed. Money does have to be elastic, in the sense that human nature, you can look on our site, there's plenty of, probably the number one period of hoards of Roman coins that are found is the 3rd century. You had a run there with 20 some emperors, and 13 of them are assassinated. I mean, it's very, unstable period of time. So people would bury coins for safety. There have been hoards, as many as 50,000 coins have been discovered in Britain. So whenever there is uncertainty of geopolitical nature, what happens? People spend less and they hoard. All right, that's why they went to negative interest rates. Let's punish these people for hoarding their money, force them to spend. Didn't work. All right. If you don't have confidence in the future, you're not going to invest. That's why, we've done studies. The stock market's never peaked with the same level of interest rates twice. 1899, it peaked at 200%. 1929, it basically just peaks at 6%, but 29 is much bigger. Why? Mainly because if you think you can make 5% next year, you'll borrow and pay 1, maybe 2. But if you don't think you're going to make 2%, you won't even borrow paying 2 or 1. The real issue is it's your expectation. All right. If you expect to make a profit, then you will borrow. If you do not expect to make a profit, you're not going to borrow. This is what these politicians don't understand. Trying to go to negative interest rates to force people to invest in what? Nothing's going up. It's all going down. Why should I do that? They don't get it. They just don't get it. It's like I said, when back in high school, I realized the professor from physics was telling the truth and the one in economics class was lying. He said, there's no business cycle. It's all random. So we can manipulate it the way we want to. Sorry, you're dead wrong. You cannot force people to invest if there is no opportunity to invest. Simple as that.
How would you recommend someone protects their wealth? Do you believe in investing in precious metals like gold and silver?
You have to make sure that you have physical possession of it because they are also well aware of that. And when Roosevelt confiscated gold, what did he do? He didn't go house to house and say, give me everything in your sock drawer. He went to the banks. Whatever you had, you got to turn over. And that's why you still can buy a $20 gold piece from 1925. All right. So they would not be likely to go in on a house to house type thing. But if there are storage facilities, yes, they will go after those. Well, you have to understand, what is this digital currency nonsense really about? They think, as I said, 35% on average of the economy isn't paying taxes. They think that if they eliminate the physical money, they'll force everybody into digital currencies, and therefore they'll get more, 35% more in taxes. This is what they actually think. All right, so you have to understand your opponent and what he thinks is what's going to drive it, not what you think. All right. So I would be more concerned about even like the cryptocurrencies. With the signing of a pen, they can just confiscate it all and convert it to theirs. And when they were starting this whole bank CBDC stuff, what was going on? The Bank of England, you can look up, came out and said, oh, it should be programmable because a mother should be able to prevent her child from buying a chocolate bar for lunch instead of a sandwich. Very nice. But if a mother can do that, they can do whatever they want. That's what it's really about. All right. I can tell you, because I'm not, I've spoken about this to a couple of people. I'm not sure there's been much written about it, but planning to move to this one world government, the IMF has already created their own digital currency. What they are planning with war, the UN would then emerge as the peacemaker to justify being the world dominating power. The IMF, in creating its currency, plans already to replace the US dollar as the reserve currency. So they're just moving to a digital platform so that they can make sure they collect every penny of tax they think about. That's the goal. So that's why I say be careful. You're buying gold or whatever, it shouldn't be in a storage facility that they know about. Two, you're better off with even stock, equity, things of this nature, private sector, no government bonds, period. I can give you another example. When Italy was in trouble, you had 30-day paper. Oh, okay, fine. We're going to convert that to 10 years. They can do whatever they want. They have the police, they have the tanks, they have the guns. What do you have? All right. That's what this is all about. They know they're losing power. And this is what their version of the Great Reset is all about. How do we retain power and keep these scum of the earth basically beneath our feet? That's really what this is about. If you think that they care about you at all, good luck.
Sometimes when we hear all this news or all this information, or we study history, and we see all the negatives, it could get overwhelming. So how do you learn and educate, but as well as don't miss out on the other sides of life that is beautiful?
When I was a hedge fund manager, you're dealing in billions of dollars back and forth. Then you go out to dinner and you spend $300. All right. It's like a shock back to reality. People talk about billionaires. You can't even spend $1 billion. All right. When you get to that level, it's political. Look what I got. I'll give you this. You do that. That's all it's good for. All right. I think that our local communities are basically what we have to really, hold on to for that beautiful part of life. We have to understand that to get to that point, we do have to go through the pain. All right. Canada will break up, US will break up, Europe will break up. This this idea of a centralized control will not work. It never has in history, even once. All right. It can be sustained for a couple of decades and it falls apart. It is tyranny, absolute tyranny. When they were forming the euro, they came to me. I sat down with them, warned them that this is not going to work. You have to consolidate all the debts to make it a national debt. And they wouldn't do that because Germany, Kohl, to take the Germans into the euro, he never allowed them to vote. He did it unilaterally. And to do that, he basically said you can't consolidate the debts because if he was forced to go to election, he admitted publicly he would have lost 7-1, but he still did it. So, I warned them that what they were doing was just transferring the volatility from the currency markets to the bond markets. So now one country they think is doing better pays less rate than another. And I even explained to them, I said, well, you have to understand, your view of the United States is just wrong. We have 50 states, and each state pays a different level of interest rates according to their balance sheet. You're only looking at the federal level, not the state level. And so you have to understand, you got to hunker down a little bit. If you understand what's happening, then you're in a better position to say, okay, fine, this is what has to be changed. That's more or less why I do these things. I've got 4 grandkids. I get, Scotty gets to beam me up before all this nonsense. I'll watch from upstairs, but, what kind of a world are we leaving them? Or even you? I mean, you're going to have to live through this longer than me. But if we understand what is happening, how did we arrive at this place? Then you can prevent it. But we are going to have to hit, it's like on a computer, Control-Alt-Delete. Got to reboot it.
What is the legacy that you want to leave for your grandchildren?
I would like to leave a country that's better off, but I know that I don't have enough time left in my life to be able to do that. Hopefully, maybe one day they'll look back on all these things and understand what I said because they're still pretty young. But look, I don't know. I've just dealt with politicians for such a long time. 30, 40 years ago, I could sit down and have a drink with one and actually have an intelligent conversation. Maggie Thatcher I would even invite me to her house for a Christmas party. I can't think of one world leader today that I'd even want to shake hands with, no less sit down and have a drink with. That's a sad statement. Not Macron nobody, absolutely nobody. The head of Italy, I thought she was going to be all right. She's got two neocons on her cabinet, and they're pushing for war. She actually came out. Russia's going to have to accept our terms. You really? When I was down there, I said, well, I'm glad I'm looking at the Colosseum because it might be for the last time. Where's this hatred coming from? It's just, I don't think they realize what they're playing with.
What is the legacy that you want to leave for your grandchildren?
I would like to leave a country that's better off, but I know that I don't have enough time left in my life to be able to do that. Hopefully, maybe one day they'll look back on all these things and understand what I said because they're still pretty young. But look, I don't know. I've just dealt with politicians for such a long time. 30, 40 years ago, I could sit down and have a drink with one and actually have an intelligent conversation. Maggie Thatcher I would even invite me to her house for a Christmas party. I can't think of one world leader today that I'd even want to shake hands with, no less sit down and have a drink with. That's a sad statement. Not Macron, nobody, absolutely nobody. The head of Italy, I thought she was going to be all right. She's got two neocons on her cabinet, and they're pushing for war. She actually came out. Russia's going to have to accept our terms. You really? When I was down there, I said, well, I'm glad I'm looking at the Colosseum because it might be for the last time. Where's this hatred coming from? It's just, I don't think they realize what they're playing with.
What is your definition of greatness?
I don't know. I think trying to contribute to major change. I do consider that Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher had visions, and they were visions for the benefit of society. Often they were, misinterpreted, whatever. Maggie got a lot of criticism for doing a poll tax, but her view was if everybody at least paid something, then they would pay attention to what these politicians are doing. That was her reasoning. Of course, it was flipped the other way. I don't know. You just look at what has happened. It's hard to say, who's going to emerge from this period where you would say it was a great, greatest, or I don't know. I just think it's something that really tries to contribute to society, rather than Alexander the Great because he conquered so many lands. It's a little bit different than I think what we would like to see, maybe.
Well, Martin, I want to take this last little bit of time, to thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing all of your knowledge, especially in economics, what you're really known for.
Well, thank you for inviting me.